Chapter 7. One jump ahead. And that's how I think the adventure would go, Guild Girl said, holding up an index finger and smiling. Cowgirl tilted her head, not quite sure how to respond. It was just before noon at the Adventurers Guild. The people who had gone out weren't back yet, and the people who hadn't were still sleeping. The formerly crowded front desk was devoid of people now, and Guild Girl had time to spare. And so she engaged Cowgirl, who was afraid she might be intruding, in idle chatter over tea. Flying carpets, spirits in lamps, burning water, star sand. The desert country, which Cowgirl had heard of but never seen, seemed fantastical, full of so many impossible things that 1,001 nights wouldn't have been time enough to tell them all. She decided that when he got home, she would probably ask him about it. She had all kinds of questions, and perhaps he would have things he wanted to talk about as well. This was what she had wanted to do once, long, long ago. Well, in any case, as long as everyone gets home safely, that's what matters. She smiled with a hint of difficulty. New lands meant unknown dangers and monsters. This was an adventure unlike his others, in a place unlike any he had ever been. Sometimes adventurers left in high spirits and with high expectations and never came back. Adventuring was always dangerous. If it was completely safe, if you could be totally sure you'd come home, then it couldn't be called an adventure. They are all seasoned veterans now, and I'm sure they know what they are doing. But, even so, it was hard to be the one who had to wait and worry. Guild Girl played with the quill pen she was holding, looking despondent. Cowgirl understood those feelings very well. She didn't know much about this occupation called adventuring. She saw adventurers from time to time when she stopped off at the guild to deliver provisions. There was the one who carried the huge sword on his back, and the one who was never far from his spear. Then there was the witch with the white-brimmed hat. Cowgirl herself had relied on them before, and she had every reason to hope they would come home safely. And if Guild Girl shared those same feelings, then, I think he's just fine, Cowgirl informed her with a smile. Guild Girl said, blinking. How's that again? Yesterday. A lumpy donkey arrived, supposedly sent by him. In other words, that was the reason for Cowgirl's good mood. He had remembered the simple conversation they'd shared before he left. And at least until the moment he had requested that thing, he had been safe. Would it have killed him to include a letter or something, though? He did have his own strange sense of how to be considerate. He had included a manual detailing the care and feeding of the creature. Oh, a camel, was it? Camel. That's right, camel, Cowgirl remembered now. She thought it was such a strange name. The lumpy donkey was a camel. Something she had always thought belonged only to fairy tales, which she had now seen with her own eyes. When he got home, she would tell him what she had named it, although she thought he might know. Could that camel possibly be his idea of a souvenir? Well, with him, it's hard to say. She giggled at the thought, waving a hand when Guild Girl gave her a strange look. Anyway, Cowgirl said, keen to change the subject, is it okay that we got so caught up in our little chat? No, it isn't, Guild Girl replied with a smile. I'm on the clock. Cowgirl strived to keep her expression ambiguous so as not to draw attention to herself. She was thinking about her surprise to discover this side of this young woman. I thought she was supposed to be a pampered young noble. And yet here Guild Girl was having a pleasant conversation with her. Several years ago, she would never have imagined it of herself. Here I'd planned to do some paperwork today, Guild Girl lamented. Our little secret, okay. Hee. Then she discreetly showed Cowgirl some of the papers. Cowgirl couldn't help looking even as she asked herself whether this was really all right, and on the sheet she saw a familiar name. It was the cleric girl who worked with him. This is, what do you call it? For a promotion interview, right? She knew he had undergone several of those himself, such that he was now silver-ranked. But she had never seen the paperwork before, and all she could do was exclaim in astonishment at it. She herself may not really realize it yet, but she has more than enough experience and ability. Guild Girl straightened the papers with a quick rap on the desk and put them back in their place. The realization will come naturally as she works. True enough. It can be hard to really know what you can do or how well. Maybe people wouldn't fret so much about it if they could write out all their skills and abilities and qualities like labels on a product. Cowgirl briefly considered what her stats would be if she could quantify them and laughed aloud at how meaningless they would be. I wonder if she's out there sweating whether she'll be promoted or not. I doubt it. She's probably got her hands full with her adventure. Maybe. Then again, maybe not. I wonder what expression this woman will have on her face as she welcomes that girl home. First, no doubt, she'd congratulate the group on its efforts. Then she would ask about the adventure. It would all be about goblins, no doubt. And then, she would certainly take great pleasure in changing the subject of the conversation to the promotion interview. The girl would flinch, then looked panicked, worried, and nervous one by one. I see it. Even Cowgirl was starting to get excited just imagining it. So much so that any anxiety all but disappeared. Is that how you survive the wait? Cowgirl asked. Guild Girl muttered, putting a finger to her lips thoughtfully. Then she nodded. Yes, I suppose this is how I get through it. Trusting they'll come home. Preparing the paperwork for when they do. Getting ready. Cowgirl said softly. She agreed completely. Then maybe I'll do the same thing. She rose slowly from her chair. It would be lunchtime soon, and there would be more adventurers around. She didn't know if it would be tonight or tomorrow. So, well, she felt bad for Uncle, but, leaving already. Yeah. Got to get dinner ready, you know. Tonight she would make plenty of stew and wait. Pause. A new hope. When I opened my eyes, I was in a simple bed, the twin moons high in the sky, proving that it was late at night. My frail body shivered against the cold, and I curled into myself, hugging my slim shoulders. I had been given only a thin blanket and a one-piece garment with a hole for my head. And the indifferent starlight wasn't going to keep me warm. The weight and chill of the collar and chains reminded me unpleasantly of where I was. It was pathetic enough to make a person want to cry, but it could have been worse. True. For a moment there I wasn't sure I was going to survive. Almost immediately after parting with the rogues, we were picked up by kidnappers, sold at a cheap price. But I made it. If you can call winding up as a slave on a farm making it. We could just count ourselves lucky that the farmers weren't too cruel. I clutched the golden charm that glimmered at my neck, grateful they hadn't taken it from me. Across the room, the rear girl was snoring loudly, as if she hadn't a care in the world. We'd been friends a long time, and I had always found her impudent streak admirable and aggravating in equal measure. I'm glad we at least wound up with personable masters. A corpulent, good-natured one, and a young man who seemed to be his nephew. The two of them treated us like slaves, yes, but quite well for all that. They spoke to us almost the way one might to a friend or at least a servant. If it hadn't been for the mission with which I had been entrusted, I might have been more than happy to stay here for decades. Although the young master does seem a bit reckless at times, I couldn't resist a bit of a smile there in my freezing bed. Earlier today, I'd seen the young man get a scolding for starting a fight at the bar or something. Why were human youngsters always so eager to rush ahead with no thought for what might happen? I must say, it makes little sense to me. Born as an elf of the desert and nobility at that, I had long served as a lady-in-waiting to the royal family of this land, for generations, no less. And yet even now I didn't understand humans. Come to think of it, I had been the perpetual companion of the princess. I had never met such a straightforward young human. As for my snoozing rear friend, maybe she knew differently. Still unable to sleep, I looked out the window, up at the stars, but then finally shook my head. Oh, forget the stars. I should be thinking about the princess. How could I help her? Should I break out of here? I didn't really want to make life that difficult for my new masters, but suddenly there was a soft noise outside my room. I flicked my long ears and pulled up my bedsheets. Nobody could deceive the ears of an elf on a night as silent as this one. As I expected, it was the young man standing in the doorway. I went still as a board in the bed, watching him with only my eyes. "I is something the matter, young sir." I privately chided myself for letting my voice tremble. But the young man didn't seem to notice. It appeared that his uncle, the owner of this place, had gone out in the middle of the night, and he wondered if we might know something. The uncle had claimed he would be back by morning, but something about him had seemed strange. "It's true," I said, bracing myself against the bed under the covers and pushing myself up. "The master did go out. That much I know. As I said, no one can sneak past an elf. Of course I noticed when the master left. Come to think of it, someone did come to visit the master in the evening. I had been so busy with my work that I didn't even have the leeway to look up and see who it was, but I knew someone had been there. The master had accepted a message cylinder from them, checked the contents, and gone pale. Perhaps that's connected somehow." The young man looked very disturbed by this. He told me to wait a moment, then left the room, but he soon returned. In his hand was an old, but still truly brilliant, scabbard in which resided an elegant curved blade. It looked heavy, perhaps because the scabbard was made of lead. Now that I thought about it, I seemed to recall the young man had the same sword with him when he had gone to the tavern this afternoon. "What manner of sword is that, sir?" He informed me that it was an heirloom passed down through his family. Many generations ago, one of his forebears had traveled to this place in order to seal away this sword. Privately, I thought that all seemed like a bit much work for one measly blade. Humans always had to be so dramatic about everything they did, but I thought again when, with a look of absolute determination, the young man drew the sword from its sheath. At that instant, the charm at my neck began to jangle violently, producing an ear-splitting screech. The sword glowed bluish-white and emitted a low thrum. It seemed absolutely imbued with magical power and a fearsome aura of death. "Master. That sword," now my voice was really shaking. Even my friend, who I had thought was asleep, sat up and looked wide-eyed at the blade. She whistled, impressed, and I didn't have the wherewithal to admonish her for it. Gulp. The sound seemed so loud, was that me swallowing? Before I knew what I was doing, I had thrown myself at the feet of the young man, pressing my forehead to the ground. I couldn't even bring myself to hide anything anymore. "Help!" I exclaimed. "Please, you must help her. The princess, she was imprisoned in the castle. Her life was in danger." Tears started to pour from my eyes, so overwhelmed was I with emotion. The young man listened to me silently and finally responded with just a few quiet words. He was a knight, like his father before him. Thus the young man, with the shimmering sword still shining in his hand, left with us, his servants, in tow. He was heading into the wild desert, where fearsome chaos and evil plots were swirling. But the young man had no strength, no knowledge. Only courage, only the dice of fate and chance knew how the boy's adventure would turn out. Truth, illusion, and all the many gods around their table could not imagine it. They did not know where his next step would take him nor where he would finally arrive. All of that would be determined by the boy's own will, swayed by the force of his own spirit. But one thing, and one thing only, was sure. Like the adventure before his quest would become one known to all in song. Even a long time hence, in places far, far beyond the four-cornered world, it is the tale of a new hope,